I'm Tim Sanders, and you are watching Voices of Authority, brought to you by Upwork. Today, our special guest is Robert Tercek. He's the author of the award-winning book, Vaporized, one of my favorite reads ever on the subject of digital transformation. He was an executive at organizations ranging from the Oprah Winfrey Network, where he was the president of their digital division, to Sony Pictures. In fact, he founded MTV International some years ago, but today he is the founder and leader of COVID Smart, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Robert, it's great to have you on the program.
Well, thanks, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about Vaporized. In the book, you said that the digitization of products and processes and services represents the biggest cultural shift since the Industrial Revolution. Here's my question for you. How has COVID-19 sped up this process?
Well, you're exactly right. It sped it up so fast that it happened overnight. We were just talking about this the other day. In fact, with the universities in the United States, when the COVID crisis hit, some of the universities didn't close. They resisted for a little while.
Yeah.
And then overnight, it was like a dawning consciousness where suddenly they had to send all their students home. And something similar happened with most companies as well. They thought they could continue operating business as usual, and then all of a sudden, overnight, they had to shut down and revert. So you saw what happened. Most companies switched over to some sort of virtual meeting platform like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or some similar software like that. And candidly, Tim, it wasn't adequate. We've seen productivity in many cases go down, certainly with the universities and schools.
Yep.
Learning dropped tremendously. So I think here you have an example of people who've been talking about digitization, planning on it, maybe making some preparations, but they hadn't made enough preparation. And then suddenly circumstances changed. They had to launch those programs immediately. The companies that were prepared for it, they managed that transition pretty well.
What about companies today that say, you know what, the pandemic's almost over, we're going to wait this out, we're going to be back in the office, back doing face-to-face services in just a few months? Talk to me about their risk of being vaporized by waiting this out.
I think companies that prematurely return workers to the workplace face a serious risk. That's a potential for a real crisis. We've seen it happen again and again, Tim. Everybody wants to go back to work. Everybody wants to reopen the economy. Of course, we all share that. My view is we should do that safely, because the consequences of reopening in an unsafe way are dreadful, and they come pretty quickly. You've seen it happen again and again. We've run this experiment a couple times in the United States where we brought workers back or we opened up a state too soon, and then quickly you see an outbreak, and about a month later you see the death toll rise. So the fact is, this is a real problem. We've got this real pandemic. We've got to start to take it seriously, and that means we have to have a more managed process. You can't do these things fast like that.
So I see a lot of organizations on the flip side, they're trying to embrace this quickly, and they are virtualizing their value chain. What I mean by that is that from a production and operations standpoint, they're working remote virtually, right? From a marketing standpoint, they're doing remote virtual events and digital advertising. And even from services, you see healthcare virtualizing even diagnostic work and advice. How does virtualization of value chain, how does that fit into the vaporized model you talk about?
So it's a really good illustration of it. Let me explain what I mean by the term vaporized. That's just my slogan or my term that I came up for a big process, which is replacing physical things with software. And so a physical thing could be a person. You could automate that. You could replace them with an algorithm. I hate to say it that way, but we've seen examples of that, right? If you drive an Uber car, you're not working for a dispatcher. You're working for an app. So your boss is an app. And so we've seen examples of people being replaced by software. And of course, you can also replace physical equipment with software and physical products with software. So that's that concept in general. Virtualization often is referring to the hardware, for instance, the infrastructure you'd use to serve an internet service. And that is a great illustration of the vaporized concept. And of course, it's the hottest trend in cloud computing.
Right, right. You say that everything that can be information will be. So what do you think the biggest opportunity right now is for us to informationalize current physical product or service?
This is the most interesting topic because it's sort of like, what's the next big land grab?
Yeah.
Tim, you and I have lived through so many land grabs in
Right.
the digital transformation,
We
right?
have.
With the music business, the insurance industry, advertising, one industry after another, as it got absorbed into the digital sphere, all the value in that space was able to be absorbed by other companies or stolen
Mm.
by other companies. Newcomers could come and displace an existing company. We've seen it again and again and again. So as we start to move even more of the physical world into the digital world, some new opportunities open up. I see big opportunities in huge sectors of the economy like healthcare,
Okay.
education, defense, government. These are 4 areas that haven't really been touched yet by
Right.
digital transformation. They're wide
Right.
open. And bear in mind, Tim, big companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google, they have no choice. It's already priced into their stock. The stock market expects those companies to start to take a big chunk out
Right.
of those remaining sectors of the economy.
Well, let's talk about healthcare first. So give us some example of software eating through the healthcare model. Let's talk about all the way from front office to diagnosis to treatment to back office. Help us understand how that rolls across the value chain of healthcare.
For more than a decade, people have been trying to attack the problem of healthcare with technology. And so there's
Right.
no shortage of technology. And a lot of that comes in the form of devices, medical devices. One of the interesting things that happened last year is it was a question that was put in front of the FDA. Can software be a device? Can machine learning and artificial intelligence be considered a device? And the FDA agreed that it could be, even though it's software, it's not a hardware product. But they agreed to some different rules because, of course, learning software, it's not like the FDA can run it through a clinical trial and you
Right.
pass that trial and then it's the same way forever. They had to recognize that, in fact, that's going to be an evolutionary piece of software. It's going to grow and it's going to continue to get better. So they had to change their ruling a little bit there. So that's just one tiny microcosm of the many rules and regulations in the entire healthcare industry that make it so resistant to change. Those will have to change in order to accommodate more digitization. Now, we often think digitization begins with hardware, but the
Right.
fact is, Tim, we're awash in devices. So one of the things you've seen happen with COVID-19 is suddenly going to the doctor's office is the last thing anybody wants to do. Unless you have symptoms of
Exactly.
COVID-19, you want to stay
Right.
at home, right?
Right.
So suddenly, en masse, everybody in U.S. healthcare systems shifted over to virtual visits with doctors. We all got accustomed to that. If you had a doctor's appointment, it was typically a call or sometimes a video call
Right.
with that doctor. And you know what? That's a perfectly satisfactory substitute if you don't have some crisis or an acute thing that you have to deal with at a clinic. If it's just to ask a question or get some advice. But it gets even bigger than that, Tim, because these are tiny examples. So let me give you some much bigger ideas to consider.
Okay.
Okay, so now imagine if you're Apple or you're Microsoft or you're Google, you're not going to make a little tiny incremental change like introduce some medical device or something. What you really want to do is disrupt healthcare in a significant way. If you think about the US healthcare system today, apart from the hospital system that we have, most of it is about medication. We give pills to people, right? That's the big value in the healthcare field right now. So some situation happens, you go to your doctor and the doctor prescribes you some pills and now you're on that pill for a period of time, maybe forever, right? The most valuable medications are those that are lifetime subscriptions.
Right.
Well, the folks in the technology industry look at that. They're not going to go into pharmaceuticals. They're not even going to take those companies on head on. Instead, what I think they're going to do is offer an information substitute that keeps you healthy. And so when we look at things like Apple Watch and wearables, what we're talking about is a device that will give you an information advantage, maybe even predictive data, recommendations, so that you can stay healthy. In other words, will keep you out of the healthcare system altogether. Now,
Wow.
you might say, well, how's that healthcare? Well, if they keep you to the left, of the line before you go into that healthcare system, then that means your lifetime use of healthcare, the healthcare system, and thereby pharmaceuticals, is going to go down. So the lifetime value of that customer to a pharma company will decrease the more that customer is kept healthy with information products.
And I could see how that's incredibly disruptive.
Yeah.
In your opinion, if the pharma companies, the life science companies, if they were further along in deep learning, or at least further along in artificial intelligence, would that have accelerated the vaccine or treatment development process for COVID-19?
Oh, it's a very good point. Well, sure. So in fact, you put your finger on the exact place where the existing companies are using technology. Most of the big pharma companies, when they use AI or machine learning, they're using it in order to accelerate the process of discovering a new drug, discovering a new compound. And that, by the way, that's a good strategy. That makes a good deal of sense for them. But notice that they're not really changing their fundamental business. They're still making pills. That's going to be the business business they stay in. So that still leaves them vulnerable to being displaced by an information product that makes it possible for me to never take a pill.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. They are using AI to accelerate the process. Now, there's another thing that happened also early on in this COVID crisis. The international sharing of data has been quite impressive. We hear people grumble that you're not getting good data from one country or another, and that may be true. But in general, we've seen the whole scientific community has rallied in a way it never has previously. In a matter of months, they were sharing data on a global scale, and there are now task forces around the world coordinating and sharing data with each other about how to fight this, what the symptoms are, how to track it, and so forth. One example of that is the sequencing. So we now have gotten so sophisticated with the ability to sequence a genome that the virus genome was sequenced in a matter of days, and I think that occurred in February, as early as February. And then it was there were additional sequences taken shortly after that, and then information was provided very fast. So that's like kind of the roadmap or the blueprint to try to understand how this virus operates and what makes it tick.
Wow, wow. So your point is that information eats the pill business, and it's sort of like reminds me of something Bill Ford Jr. just said last year. He said every company, including Ford, we need to be an information company. That's what we need to be. It kind of makes me think, Robert. Is Zoom disrupting Ford greatly by solving the problem of having to get in your car to go do a face-to-face meeting? Is that an example of software surprisingly eating a physical product like a car?
This is exactly it, Tim. Most of the time when I talk to the CEOs of companies, they'll say to me, hey, look, I understand my competitors. I have 5 competitors and I know their products well and I know how we compete. I say, great. And they'll say, but what I need your help with is show me the disruptors that I can't even see that are coming from the periphery, from an entirely different field. That's where displacement occurs, right? It's not going to come from your direct competitor because they're all kind of optimized along the same exact business model. I think the thing you need to be concerned about is a company you can't see coming from the periphery. That's going to come in and make it possible for people to replace your product altogether. What I call demand destruction. So the idea that I no longer need to have that car because the car is sitting in my garage depreciating while I'm in the home using Zoom and I'm doing my meetings all virtually.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
Zoom doesn't benefit directly from disrupting the auto industry, and that's what people tend to forget, right? They think that disruptors are coming in and trying to take a slice of the pie of that traditional business. No, Zoom can have a perfectly good business selling software, and meanwhile, they're also collapsing the need for physical architecture, meeting spaces, conference rooms, transportation, hotel lobbies, office lobbies. If you think about all those places where people meet in the real world, Zoom's an adequate substitute for that under the circumstances.
I think you're right. And to that point, so just recently I was reading a bunch of articles on Olympus exiting the business. Between you and I wasn't surprised. They just haven't been able to compete like with Sony on the cost of bigger sensors, compete with other camera manufacturers like Nikon, for example, and others. Canon's got the best lenses. So I really just thought, Robert, that Olympus exit really was about industry consolidation, their failure to innovate around key components in this new 4D or 4K reality. But you think that Olympus leaving is the latest example of a company being vaporized. Are you saying they're the latest Kodak?
Yeah, so that's an interesting comparison, right, Tim? Because Kodak is kind of the poster child for how to do digitization wrong. Kodak had all the advantages.
They had the first digital camera. They had the first digital camera.
They had the intellectual property. They knew exactly how to do it. But what they were afraid to do was to do it to themselves. And we often hear companies say, well, I'm not going to cannibalize my business. I'm afraid to cannibalize my company, right? So what they're really saying is we're going to handicap our own internal team and allow some competitive company to steal that opportunity to harm our business. It's self-destructive on a massive scale. Now, did Olympus pursue that? I can't quite say. What I can tell you is that they were clearly not the lead in the digital camera business, which is getting tougher by the day because why do you need to carry a digital camera when the smartphone in your pocket does almost as good of a job? Not quite, but almost as good of a job. You have to go for a pretty high-end digital camera to be better than the high-end smartphones today. And the smartphones are priced accordingly. Basically, when you buy a $1,000 smartphone,
Yeah.
$300 of that cost is the price of the camera, right? It's embedded in
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely.
But you're willing to do that because it's convenient, right? The photographers always say the best camera is the one that you have with you. And now today, everybody's got a smartphone in their pocket. So that's everyone's favorite camera.
You're right.
And now you have to have a really strong reason for carrying a second camera around with you. Olympus couldn't answer that question. They didn't have a very strong reason. As you pointed out, they weren't the leader in lenses. They weren't the leader in sensors and so forth. Now, the vaporized trend over the last 20 years of replacing physical stuff with software has hit consumer electronics very, very hard.
Right.
So in the same decade where the sales of smartphones skyrocketed to a point where 85% of the people in the United States now have a smartphone,
Yeah.
at that same time, we saw double-digit decreases in the sales of consumer electronics, things like MP3 players, yes, digital cameras, GPS units. You just don't need that stuff if you've got a smartphone because your smartphone does that job well enough. And now today, arguably, it does it better.
It does it even better. And as a matter of fact, for those of you watching the program, almost every one of our guests that are on Voices of Authority, obviously we're producing this with them remotely, and we are using an iPhone 11 Pro for many of these interviews, to your point, Robert. But I'm telling you right now, I'm sitting in my studio. You can see behind me the guitars. I don't have a guitar tuner anymore. I used to have guitar tuners. They're made by Boss. You remember them? Like $100. And they're really nice. It's an app on my phone. Don't have an egg timer anymore. It's an app on my phone. So the application of so many devices really speaks to your point. Now,
that's right.
You know, vaporizing yourself is part leadership and mostly execution, I believe. So it's a vision that we as business leaders commit ourselves to do, this self-vaporization. But then we got to start spending money against it, right? It doesn't just happen because we make the decision. So I'm putting up a chart here. This was adapted from the book Information Masters. And it's a wonderful book, and it was well researched, but it was put out over 15 years ago. And what the author was talking about was the idea that if you audited the journey of an organization like Sears, and that organization wanted to become an information master, which means that they capture almost perfect leverage over customer information. And back in those days, Robert, that was the gold standard of IT, right? And you look at this chart and you see where the money goes and where their success comes from. And you notice that here, if you look at the chart, 92% of all the historical investment in IT went for what? Tech and information. But the other 8%, the soft stuff, actually determined more of the success. In fact, if you just looked at what's in red, the investment in people and culture and leadership, that 5% was 50% of the outcome versus 92% only producing 20%. I want you to comment on that in the face of current digital transformation efforts. Is it similar in terms of what's really, really important for leaders to focus on in investment?
Well, you know, this chart tells us so much, Tim. And so for sure, to answer your question, if you're going to be giving people technology and tools, you better invest a little bit more in training so that they know how to use the tools well. But this also tells you that you can't just throw hardware at a problem, right? So when they talk about that investment technology, it reminds me of that comment from the economist Robert Solow. Robert Solow, he said, well, the computer age is everywhere except in the productivity statistics. Remember, that was the big complaint in the 80s and the 90s, that people were investing in a tremendous amount in computer technology, but we weren't seeing an increase in productivity. Now, in some respects, that's a mismeasurement. That reflects a mismeasurement of the economy, right? Because let's say if the smartphone in my pocket costs $1,000, but I'm no longer buying a digital camera, a GPS unit, an egg timer, a guitar tuner, all that other stuff, well, that actually looks like GDP went down, right? So as my phone absorbs more functionality, paradoxically, even though that's more efficient for me and I get more value out of it as a customer, I like my phone better and I don't have to carry that other junk around with me. That's good for me, but in terms of how we measure the economy, it actually looks like our GDP went down. So part of that productivity paradox is a mismeasurement. But part of the productivity paradox is also there's a learning curve with every technology. And it takes quite a while to teach people. In other words, technology outpaces human capacity for learning and mastering skills. So if a company isn't making a concerted effort to train their employees and do it on an ongoing basis, then they're going to be wasting money on technology people don't know how to use. Moreover, Let's talk about leadership. You're all about leadership, Tim, and you're focused on it for a very good reason. The job of leaders is to take us to places that we don't even know we need to go, right? A good leader says we got to go in this direction and has the charisma to persuade people to follow her.
Right.
Well, if we have leaders who don't know where to go in the digital arena, they don't know what direction to send people, they don't speak from expertise, and they have decades of experience in an old business that they understand very well, but they have no expertise in digitization, how much confidence are people going to have in following that leader? So we also have to make a consistent effort to upgrade our leadership skills so that leaders understand digital technology, they understand how to lead people into new digital ideas. The classic example, Tim, is you see companies invest a ton of investing in business process, but they haven't actually changed their business. So it's the same old business. We're just adding some computers. Maybe we're automating some parts of the back office. Maybe we're giving the accounting department some new tools and so on.
Yeah.
Oh, you're doing digital marketing. Great. But you're still selling widgets and you're selling them at a physical retail shop.
Yeah.
Guess what? You're ripe for displacement. Absolutely.
And I just have to go back. You said, for leaders to really, give people the confidence to follow them in digital transformation, they need to really understand it. It reminds me of two old sayings from when I was younger. Here's the first one. You never take a shop class from a teacher who's missing 3 fingers. Ever heard that one? Here's another one. You never take financial advice from a guy who has to take 4 buses to meet with you. Okay, so to your point, for those of you watching, digital transformation starts with your own education. And Peter Sheehan, one of our previous guests on Voices of Authority, said, you cannot commercialize what you do not first personalize. And Robert, you've really underscored that. What is your advice to give leaders a way to really ramp up their digital transformation starting right now?
Well, there's a couple things I would do. The first thing is any executive who feels less than confident about their ability to lead in digital transformation should have a personal advisor. And, Tim, we've talked about this in the past. You can successfully put together your own, say, personal board of directors, people that you're accountable to, right?
Yeah.
So if I were, say, leading an organization, a traditional organization, manufacturing company, or a traditional services business, I would put together my own personal board of advisors who are the smartest digital experts that I can reach. And I would make myself accountable to those people. Of course, they'd provide mentorship and advice, expertise on demand when I need it. But more importantly, the point is for them to hold me accountable to the goals that I set forth. That's thing number one. The second thing is you've got to make sure that your senior managers are aware of and embracing this transformation. Too often I've seen companies go sideways with their digital transformation because one or more executives who have a lot of influence and a lot of power, typically the people that are, governing the revenue from the existing product, the old product line, for instance, they're a little bit defensive about that. Sometimes they're very overtly defensive about that. Well, managers are going to have to lead by helping those people make that transformation, embrace that, and actually have to align the incentives. So that brings it back to HR as well. Every executive has to have a stake in that digital transformation process, and they have to have a reward at the end of it.
Yeah, my favorite definition of culture is that culture is a conversation led by leaders, punctuated by action, about how we do things here successfully. And what I hear you saying here is, leaders, you need to lead that conversation, and it probably needs to have a very high cadence for you to really have that change throughout the organization and not just buying digital off the shelf.
So one thing that you're starting to see happen slowly through the economy is a change in the composition of the C-suite. In the past, you saw that there were chief information officers, then chief information security officers, and chief technology officers. So we started to add people to the C-suite who had some of this expertise. But then if you looked at the rest of the organization, it was like we were creating a silo, an information or digital silo inside of a traditional company. Not surprisingly, that wasn't the most successful arrangement. Then they decided to consolidate all that activity and created a new thing about 10 years ago, a chief digital officer. And this is the person who's supposed to supervise all digital activity, whether it was infrastructure or customer accounts or sales or some form of digital marketing. They should have purview over everything. Well, I think you're going to see coming in after this COVID-19 crisis, you're going to see a D-suite where we simply sweep away executives who don't have deep digital experience. And it will no longer be a special area or a special department or some silo. It will be the entire company will have digital executives leading it. People who have deep experience, whether it's in e-commerce or online marketing or digital operations or data science.
I'm reading a book right now called Competing in the Age of AI, and they talk about the idea that the future organization, which disrupts everything, at its very center has a decision factory that is run by AI. And that doesn't mean AI takes over, but it means, to your point, that a lot of the ways we think about the organization are going to have to be swept aside in order to really leverage the technology that's available to us. That makes sense to me. I want to change the subject a little bit here. So there's a lot of organizational leaders I've been talking to that are starting to get fed up with the question of like, what's the new normal look like? People are asking them like, when are things going to get back to normal? And they're all looking for a silver lining. And in fact, our CEO, Hayden Brown, she's really adopted this idea that we're not going to go back to work, we're going to go back to better. And the reason why is because she truly believes that remote work, it works. And there's a lot of benefits for us working from home, or more importantly, Robert, working from anywhere, working at any time. And I wonder what your take on this is. Do you believe that back to better is a possibility? Do you believe that organizations have learned something through this experience that can create either more effectiveness organizationally or a better work experience for their talents?
Well, Tim, you're speaking about the COVID-19 crisis, this global pandemic that we're experiencing. It touches every single company and every single person on the planet. Nobody's immune, nobody's exempt from it. And I think Hayden's absolutely right. People like working from home. If you can possibly work from home during this crisis, it's for sure the safest thing you can do. It's also the most convenient thing you can do. Okay, admittedly, you've got to manage kids if there's young children in the house or pets or something. I mean, we've all seen that experience where somebody's cat walks through the screen when you're on a Zoom call or something, but we can all roll with that. People have gotten accustomed to that. I think in this last 2 or 3 months of lockdown, you start to see everybody in the world is making a transition to working from home and finding, to their great delight, they don't have to sit in traffic. They don't have to commute. They don't even have to deal with a car. Hey, they don't even have to put on a suit and tie if that was what they had to do in the past. So there's a lot of aspects they like, even though there's some inconveniences at home that they have to manage through. And coming out the other side of this crisis, people are going to be quite adept at working from home. In fact, I think that's a great growth opportunity. Again, organizations are going to have to be very careful in their HR. How do you manage remote workers? How do you manage their mental health? How do you manage their physical health so they're not just spending 8 hours a day looking at a video camera, right? They've got to get up and move around. You got to manage team integration. Are people integrating in the same way? Now, some folks, like a lot of software development teams, have been practicing remote work for a long time. So they're quite adept at it and they know how to check in. They know how to use a messaging service or something, notifications to let people know that they're around, they're responsive and so forth. But the rest of us haven't had that experience. People who were working in an office didn't have that experience. So we're learning it really fast. And frankly, we need roller skates to catch up with some folks. It's a job for HR to manage, to make sure that it's equalized, that learning is spread around equally. Now, the interesting thing is an organization like yours, like Upwork, can actually help here because what you're really selling is expertise in remote working, right? That's really what you've got. You've got people in all sorts of different categories of skills. But all of them have this one thing in common, that they're quite good. They don't need a lot of management to get their job done. They know how to work remotely. That's actually a real benefit right now. So I think one of the things you're going to see happening is when you say, back to better, or, is there an end in sight? The first thing we have to know is we're going to be dealing with this COVID-19 problem for a very long time.
Yeah.
There's no vaccine in sight. There's a lot of talk about a vaccine candidate here and there, and that's great news, and we hope that happens. But the fastest they've ever rolled out a vaccine in human history is 5 years. And also, it's going to take an additional 5 years to go around the world and vaccinate everybody. So we won't really have a solution very quickly, even though there's some impressive progress and reason to be optimistic. In the near run, we all have to change our behavior. And now companies have to understand, what is that new behavior? And how can I best manage people in that? And then how can I care for those employees? How do I take care of those employees? I don't think this lesson has sunk into every company just yet.
Got it. No, and I believe you when you say that. Robert, since about March, your Facebook page has been the best source of information. I find it to be the most unbiased, the most scientifically based. You are my personal expert on this. I know you hate that word expert. Talk about the shift, because you for years, decades, you've been focusing on this vaporization idea of digital transformation. But 2020, you completely pivoted your locus of attention to COVID-19. Talk to us a little bit about your new focus on COVID-19
happy to do it.
in research.
What happened, Tim, is as a result of those Facebook posts, which were widely shared, where I just tried to share with people factual information as far as I could verify it. And the cool thing about Facebook is there's always people who know more, and they'll come back and correct you. So actually, it's like a self-correcting mechanism. But I would expose my thought process, and people would help me correct it. And then I'd share that widely, and it would get reshared. Well, through that, two things happened. One, a friend of mine challenged me and said, you can do much more than Facebook. You've got immense talent and immense skills. Apply them to finding a solution. And I thought, but I don't know anything about medical science, and I can't work in a hospital. How can I do that? What I do know a lot about is designing and launching information services. And so a second friend of mine, a person I worked with 10 years ago in Australia, has designed online learning programs. His name is Mike Woods. He's a genius. He's been doing online learning and certification programs for occupational training. So he focuses on training people in factories and office settings and clinics and so forth. And he reached out to me as a result of those comments on Facebook. He said, hey, Rob, my team in Australia has developed a training program for COVID-19 so that workers can go back safely to the workplace. And I said, oh, Mike, that's a great product. Everybody in the world needs it. It's not just for Australia. And actually, they handled this reasonably well in Australia and New Zealand in particular, whereas other English-speaking countries haven't handled the crisis quite as well. So I struck a deal with him. I said, listen, Mike, let me help you bring this product out around the world. So we're rolling it out in the United States.
And this is COVID Smart.
COVID Smart, that's the name of it. So the product is called COVID Smart. And the idea is we can't say we're safe because, of course, as long as the virus exists and we don't have immunity, we're not safe. It's a dangerous world. But we can be smart. We can make better decisions about how we go about our day. And so what COVID Smart does is it trains workers in the exact same techniques that an epidemiologist would use during a field outbreak. In fact, the way we developed the course is we worked with the leading group of epidemiologists in the world, the people at APIC. APIC is the Association of Professionals in Infection Control and the Prevention of Epidemics. They are epidemiologists, and they work around the world. There are about 15,000 of these folks at APIC, and they assigned a group from their task force to help us improve the material, make sure it was consistent with CDC guidelines and World Health Organization guidelines. So the program we've developed right now is the gold standard, and it teaches workers how to return to work and manage their environment in a way that will minimize the risk of spreading infectious disease. Now, that might sound a little heavy to say we're bringing in the same protocols that were used for the Ebola outbreak.
Sure.
Tim, I got to stress to you, people underestimate this monster. This disease, this SARS-CoV-2 virus is a monster. And it can kill in a lot of different ways. We hear a lot about people getting pneumonia, so forth. It can kind of take over your immune system. It can hijack your immune system and turn it against the body. It can do organ damage. It's causing some people to get blood clots. Some people are having brain problems as a result of that. Other people are having heart problems, circulatory problems. It is a monster. And so we have to approach it with some respect, and we have to change our behavior. And so the right way to do that is to teach people the best behaviors. It's an information product. So effectively what I'm doing, Tim, is I'm eating my own dog food.
Yeah, you sure are. You're drinking your own champagne.
There's no medical cure. So until there's a medical cure, all we have is an information product. And so we're using information as a substitute for a medical cure that doesn't currently exist.
Boy, that brings us full circle here. For those of you watching, we're showing you the URL for COVID Smart. What kind of organizations could immediately benefit from your information product?
Any organization where people have to gather together. That could be a factory, it could be an office, it could be a retail shop, a shopping center. Of course, clinics and hospitals already have protocols in place for this, but schools don't, universities don't. And so now what we have to do is take those same proven techniques that epidemiologists use inside of a hospital or clinical setting, and we have to adapt them for the modern workplace. That's exactly what COVID Smart will do for your firm.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Last question. Just, give some leaders some advice right now as they do start coming back to the office. I had a conversation yesterday, Robert. A company's got their whole team was in the office in North Carolina with their masks on, et cetera. Give them advice on how they can create safer, not safe, but safer conditions right now for their employees that are coming back to the office.
Sure thing. Okay, so Tim, what you're probably hearing from, because I'm certainly hearing from a lot of companies that are saying, oh yeah, we're all returning to work, we're coming back on Monday or next Monday or a week from Monday. Okay, great. I always ask, have you done your training yet? And they're like, no, we're going to do that when we get together. Now you see the problem there, right? The minute you get people together without telling them what to do, they're going to all go back to their old behaviors.
Right.
And typically what you see is most people don't want to get sick, so they're all taking their own precautions. They're wearing masks, they're washing their hands, they're doing the right things. But there's always a few people who are going to do their own thing. They believe in liberty and independence, and they don't want to get constrained in any way.
Yeah.
Well, now how do you regulate that? Okay, so this is a job for policy. And if organizations don't have a clear policy, and if they haven't trained people in that policy before they set foot in the workplace, they're setting themselves up for either an outbreak or a lawsuit. And it's a really serious risk. So the first thing is get your policy straight. Second one is teach your employees what the policy is, and then invite the employees back, but tell them what to expect when they arrive so that they aren't surprised. It might seem perfectly obvious what I'm saying, but just yesterday I spoke to someone at a bank who said, well, all right, we're supposed to be at work on Monday and they haven't told us anything. And she's quite concerned because she's got little kids at home. She doesn't want to be bringing anything back from the office. And I don't blame her. I thought that was a very prudent thought on her part. Companies can do a much better job of explaining here and communicating, and frankly, over communicate. Remember, a little bit of prevention is way better than getting the consequences of this disease. The consequences for companies that return too soon include having to shut down the entire facility when you get an outbreak, sanitize it, send the workers into quarantine for 2 weeks, a massive hit on your brand if it gets out in public that you had an outbreak, and then of course potential for lawsuits or even employee action if they go out on a strike. Those are gigantic consequences. An ounce of prevention, a little bit of upfront training, a little bit of advice, some signage, teaching people how to use their protective equipment properly. All these things can be done, and they're cheap relative to those negative consequences.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And with that, we'll conclude this interview. Robert, you've been a wealth of information. I can't thank you enough for being on the program. For my viewers here, go out and buy his book, Vaporized. It will become even more relevant to you as the days roll forward. You see the URL here again for COVID Smart. I think it's a great informational product to make your organization safer. Robert, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you've been watching Voices of Authority brought to you by Upwork. I'm Tim Sanders. Please join us next time where we'll be talking to author of Net Gain and Net Worth, McKinsey's John Hagel. See you then.